Okay, yes. So Dr. Freeman has done this report. I believe this is the third year, and he took some time, and I'm really grateful again that it took some time to meet with board members and committee members, anyone in the CoC who wanted to take part in its design and just informing how to make this useful and usable moving forward. One area that I want to point out that I think was very is help it's going to be very helpful in our strategic planning process and really went above and beyond is in the recommendations section. There are some long-term and short-term goals recommendations in there, and of course he is our data person. He puts all this information together. Those recommendations are then for us to take and digest and figure out where do we want to focus our energy over the next year to five or beyond, and what do we have capacity for? Where do we need to build that capacity? But so those are recommendations that we get to choose from moving forward and add to if we choose as well. But that's what I want to say, and I want to hand it over to Victoria because being the last meeting and her incredible involvement with this entire process. She is project manager of this report. I want to just hand it over for her to do further introductions and take it over.
That makes me feel like I'm standing up at the podium with purpose. I'm actually just making sure Freeman's ready to go. But like Sherry said, Dr. Freeman Gerhardt has been part of this PIP process for the last 3 years now. And not just as the analyst and author of the report, Freeman has been part of our continuum of care for the last 3 years. Originally hired to do the 2023 point in time report, Freeman quickly joined data and system performance. He started attending all of our point in time meetings virtually because he doesn't live super close, and has been part of our CoC and the CoC's decision-making process, planning process for a few years now. And I'm really excited that Dr. Gerhardt was able to join us once again to put this report together. I think the report gets a little more thorough, which means a couple pages get added every year. So you might see a couple of new things in this year's report that you didn't see in last year's report. I really hope that it's incredibly useful. I hope that you ask great questions throughout this process. We have also provided a one-page overview for this year that we hope will be a good reference document for you so that this information can be even more useful, because the goal is for this information, for this data, to be as usable as possible so that everybody in our community knows about homelessness in Pinellas. So with that in mind, and without further ado, I will pass it off to our author, Dr. Gerhardt.
All right, well, thank you all very, very much. And I'm very excited to be here for the third year in a row. And I hope you guys enjoy the report and the presentation, because we have some, I think those of you who have read the report will notice there's some really exciting findings. And, you know, so of course, some findings that I think we need to continue to push on. So I'll highlight those.
All right, we're having a thing. Not sure why my camera's not working. All right. Sorry, guys. I don't know why this isn't working. Becky, can you screen share? Can you screen share the presentation and sorry. Sorry, everybody. Technical difficulties, just to be short. Oh, my screen share is loading.
There it goes.
It was just a Wi-Fi thing. Sorry, everybody.
If I minimize the videos on here for that, up there.
Dr. Gebhardt, make sure you speak loud enough, okay?
Yes.
Thanks. Everybody can see, okay? Do you want me to see if we can, if it helps to, does that help a little bit from people here?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so can everybody hear me like this and those online? All right, well, I know we're short on time and there's a lot of information to present, so let me just jump right into it. So in this presentation, of course, I'll talk a little bit about the methodology, but really mostly focus on the findings. But I did want to mention, specific in terms of the methodology of the point in time count. HUD requires two counts. So there's the shelter count and the unsheltered count. The sheltered count is annual. The unsheltered count, we do annually, but it doesn't have to be. It's every 2 years. And the sheltered count is going to be referred to as the housing inventory count, throughout this presentation. There's some nuance to that. But if you see the term housing inventory count or HIC, that's going to be in reference to people who were counted as shelter at this point in time. And then the point in time count and survey is actually where we go out and physically count the people and take a survey of some of their characteristics. And then what's extremely exciting about Pinellas, as I learned 3 years ago, is in addition to the HUD requirements, we do the jail count and the Pinellas County School Board. And so the methodologies are slightly different. So with the jail, and I'm sure Lieutenant Hayes will please correct me, it's the time, those who report do not disclose a permanent address when they are being released. And then the school board is a little bit different as well. It's over time, so it's not one point in time, it's from the beginning of the school year. So I believe this year it was August 10th to January 27th. So students who are identified as homeless throughout that entire time period, as opposed to one point in time. And then to look at that, I just looked at some descriptive statistics, and of course, as always, some geospatial analysis to actually map out where people are located. I wanted to just have this up here for people to skim through, because I know last year there was some confusion, I think, on all parts of what exactly youth, unaccompanied youth, parenting youth are. So I'll maybe pose that to you guys before I get started. Is there any questions about some of the definitions? One of the ways, because, even though I've been doing this for 3 years, it can get confusing. One of the ways I like to think of these categories are, there's three main household types. There's going to be this single adult, children younger than 18, and then family households, or households with at least one adult and one child. Some of these terms, like unaccompanied or subpopulations, like unaccompanied youth, parenting youth, etc. Those are subpopulations, so they can be in multiple households at one time. For example, I like to think of if there's a 24-year-old veteran, that person is going to be counted in a veteran household, also going to be counted as a single adult if he or she is single, and then also as a youth because they're younger than 25. So they're not really mutually exclusive. So that always causes some confusion. Okay. And as you can see here, this is the breakdown, the overall. We'll get into some more of the specifics. But the housing inventory count, or the shelter count, 1,325 people were identified. The point in time count and survey, 538 were identified, which is a substantial drop from last year, and a continued downward trend, which is really exciting. And I hope to have a conversation about possible reasons as to why that is, because I think it reflects actually some great work by the providers. So that gives a total reported to HUD for homelessness as 1,863. When we look at the jail and the schools, which is not reported to HUD, 125 people were identified at the jail, which is a reduction, so great job there. And then the schools, this is where I think, maybe a conversation is needed, where still a relatively high number of students over time identified as experiencing some type of homelessness. And I know it says on the agenda, questions at the end. I kind of like the format of, if you guys have a question while the information is presented in front of you, you can.
Maybe just a point of clarification on the school number. That's a cumulative yearly number versus the others that are at point in time.
Good, great question. So the schools is the total number of students who are within the Pinellas County School Board, so that's not gonna be every single school. But that's from August tenth to January 27th.
But that they filled out a survey and reported at any time during the year that they experienced homelessness.
Yeah, so there's multiple ways. So every year they have the survey where they look at, or it could be their teacher identifies them, or they go to their teacher and say that they are homeless.
I think what Kevin is getting at is that the school count is a cumulative count. So once students get onto the list, and they are surveyed as experiencing homelessness or being doubled up, they may or may not be removed from that list. Sometimes throughout the year, children are removed from the list because guidance counselors are updated and they update that list. But largely, it is a cumulative count and it is not updated throughout the year. So once a child is on the list, they are on the list. And it is also not representative of the entire family. It is representative of that student.
And I'd like to add one more thing too about definitions. So the way that homelessness is defined by the school system would be different. It's under McKinney-Vento, which is different. So doubling up would count as homelessness in that case. Whereas for HUD, literal homelessness is living in a place not meant for human habitation. And so when thinking through these numbers or this information, making sure that we're not doing those types of apples to apples comparisons, in addition to what Kevin and Freeman have already, and Victoria have already mentioned.
Yeah, it's by no means meant to minimize that
No.
number. That's like an unacceptable number, but I just think when this data gets out into the general population, you want to make sure it's clear and that there's not at any given point in time 3,623 kids on the street. So that all the other numbers are streeter or shelter homes.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and that's something that shows in the report. You'll see, so when doubling up, I'm assuming we're talking about shared housing. So these are people who are sharing housing with other families, and that's by far the largest share of the student homelessness. So HUD wouldn't consider that. And I'll show, when I get to that part of the presentation, I'll show you guys some of the figures, or if you have the document open, you could skip to that. But yeah, really great point.
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm, you're saying that that number is just the students, that doesn't include any of the adults in there. And then my other question is it possible that some of those identified there are also in the other counts?
It is, yep. So there's a lot of clarification like that. So there could be, it's shared housing that could be identified, it's duplicated in the count, and it's cumulative, which is really important. So instead of 1 point, it's several months.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to say, I'm so grateful that we include the Pinellas County Schools data. It is incredibly important, I think, that this community understands how many families and children are not living in stable housing, whether they're sleeping on a couch or doubling up. It's not the best environment for that child and family. And we need to know that. And I think by having, you can say, well, a kid might get on the list in August or September, and then they find housing and they're not on the list, but it's only 6 months. I was a teacher, not in this state, but you're aware of families and children that experience all sorts of things that impact their education and health, and not having stable housing is a huge thing. I would think this is a much more accurate picture rather than the last Tuesday or Thursday, whatever it was in January when we do the count. And I would also think that if we can look at the surveys we took on families on the point count day, there probably aren't very many families that are surveyed out in the public as we walk around. And so to think that those people are being counted twice, I think is probably not highly likely. There could be, but I think it's really, really important to I would really focus on that number. That's a disturbing number, and that's only Pinellas County schools. It's not private schools or other areas. And I think you need to understand that a school is most often a very safe place for a family to divulge that they're struggling and asking for help. And so you might get more accuracy that way as well.
Yeah, I just think it also highlights how different the intervention has to be for this as well, because, you know, they're not sitting in a shelter where you can access, they're in cars or in homes. So the interventions are very different as well. You know, I think the numbers highlight that.
Ms. Teresa Jones has a question online.
Go ahead, Teresa.
Her hand was raised. No.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Actually, I believe that Kevin just touched on what I was going to speak about, is that uh, although those families may fall under the McKinley-Vento definition of homelessness, we still, as a CoC, can, to customize our interventions to still address them. And we have been doing so through programs like Family First and others to try and assist those families as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, let me keep, so these are all great, and so up to wrap this conversation up until we have it at the end of the presentation, one of the key recommendations is partnerships, and schools are a key partnership across providers and the CoC as a whole. Okay. So the structure of how this is presentation is laid out is I'm going to talk about the shelter count and then the unsheltered count. Then a comparison between the two, then get into briefly the jail and then a little bit more in depth of the school. But so looking at all households and all shelters, we can see that most of the people identify as male, white, and are typically over the age of 45. And this is the general pattern when looking at every single household type across CoCs. But what is the interesting part, and I'll walk you through these graphs. I don't know if in the back you guys can see them, but when you break it down by household type, it's where you start to see some, I hesitate to use the word disparities, but some disparities here. When most specifically looking at family households, these family households are going to be what you see on the screen as households with at least one adult and one child that colloquially is referred to as a family household. And you can see that that is mostly populated by people, women or girls, and actually equally as important in these family households when looking at race, mostly populated by people who identify as Black or African American. For those in the room, that would be the middle chart right there.
Thank you, Dr. Gubb. Can you, as you look at a graph, can you just read off what it is and point, because I can't read from this slide. Just saying.
So let's go back to the gender. So then looking at the shelter count, looking at genders, we can see, so in the green bar, that's going to be people identified as female, yellow, male, blue is other. You aren't really going to see any blue bars here because the other, compared to male and female, the other counts are, about a handful, so it doesn't really show up. But green, girl, yellow, boy, like that. And you can see that households without children, mostly male. And you're always going to see that there's going to be a higher count in emergency shelters. There's just more people in emergency shelters, more beds, etc. So households without children, male. Households, family households, we start to see the shift. Now it's females, so mothers. And then when you get into the subpopulation categories, parenting youth households, female or girls, and then unaccompanied youth households, you can see actually a more even distribution between the genders. Questions about this? And throughout the presentation, you'll see, so the households are all going to be in the same category. So if you can't see, I'll continue pointing. Same thing with the race. Now looking at race, green is going to be Black or African American, yellow, white, blue, other. Other is gonna be pretty much anybody who is not white, it doesn't identify as white or black.
There's a laser pointer at this. You don't want that, okay.
Do you guys mind if I point up here like this?
No, it's very good.
So, once again, looking at racial categories, so we can see households without children, single adults, so people over the age of 18. Mostly identify as white. When we get into the category of family households, you see mostly identify as black or African American. And now this is gonna be the age breakdown. This is the age breakdown based on the priority populations identified by the CoC. This is different than the HUD reporting requirements. So they have, for example, categories 65 plus. We have categories 62 plus. And we also go above and beyond, and you'll see in some of these youth households where we actually break down the younger than 18 category into younger than 5, 5 to 12, 13 to 17, which goes above and beyond almost every other CoC report I've ever seen. They typically stick with just the general younger than 18 and 65. So this is really good work. So we can see that households without children mostly identify or not identify, excuse me, are over the age of 45. Stretch. And we can see that households with the family households start to skew a little bit towards the younger side. That's because there's children and multiple children in some of these households. And the color scheme is a slightly different where we're looking at the different shelter types. So ES up here you may see is going to be emergency shelter, TH in green transitional housing, and then yellow safe haven.
Answer your quick question, please. I was trying to follow you since I can't see that far. But the information that's in the packet looks to be a little different than what you're presenting.
It's organized differently. I'm seeing the same.
I don't, we have the PowerPoint of the.
Yeah, we don't have it, and I can't see that, so you're talking and I can't see any of that, so I was trying to follow along in the packet, but it's not that.
It's gonna be a little bit difficult because in the packet, you'll notice that I have the section households without children, then each demographic, and then the emergency shelter.
So you're
breakdown.
explaining that, can we get that?
The PowerPoint?
Yes.
Oh,
I'll
absolutely,
send it
yeah.
out.
Okay. All right,
Megan's-
thank you.
Megan's gonna PDF and send it to everybody right now, so
Oh.
you should have it in a few minutes.
Cause I can't see what, I can't see it, so I was trying to follow.
Very fair, and honestly, I had not considered how far away these seats were, so our apologies for you not having it ahead of time. If we thought about how far away the back row seats were, we probably would have sent it out first.
Thank you for that, thank you.
Should we have a brief bathroom break or something while we? So were you guys in the back able to follow a little bit before? Because if you have specific questions, I would love to answer any, because it is gonna be different. The information's the same as the packet. It's just I grouped everything together for the PowerPoint.
On this one, the chart all the way on the right, the households with only children younger than 18, the N is 5. Can you expand on what group that is, that there's only 5 people in there?
That's a great question that we actually just took a deep dive into the other day. That is going to be the Alpha House.
Okay.
Yeah, so one of the safe havens, and so that's interesting enough, if you have the packet in front of you, in the appendix, I believe it's gonna be around page 100 or so. There's going to be a provider count, so every single provider reported to HMIS is gonna have a breakdown of those counts back there. So you can look, but yeah, that's Alpha House.
So that's just specific to the Alpha House participants?
Not specific, that just happens to be who has those, so it wasn't, it's all providers, but Alpha House was those who serve households only children younger than 18, so kids. And now looking at chronic homelessness, we can see that when looking at all households, so this is just every single person who is identified as shelter now. Most people who are identified as chronically homeless, they're going to be in the emergency shelter, which tracks with the definition of chronic homelessness. Households without children, we can see that's where most of the people who are identified as experienced chronic homelessness are going to be those single adults. So silver lining is, although there are proportionally not that many, it's still a relatively high number of people who are experiencing chronic homelessness, and that is a priority population. The silver lining would be significantly fewer family households are experiencing chronic homelessness. So that's the good news, most definitely. And we can see that veteran households without children, still relative to the total number of veterans, a relatively high number of veterans experiencing chronic homelessness. And that aligns because some veterans may have disabilities, which is part of the definition.
The top right one, that you just said significantly fewer families are experiencing chronic homelessness. Is that just from the PIT data? It's not from the Pinellas County Schools data?
Not from the schools, and this is from the housing inventory count, which
Right.
is part of that point in
Yep.
time, that was
Yep.
of the shelter count.
So, I mean, before we get excited about that.
Yeah.
We keep the Pinellas County Schools data in mind, I would. Again, it's hard to go and survey a family out there.
Do we ask about chronic homelessness in this survey data?
I don't know. And I don't, maybe,
We even have that data set.
I don't, I would assume, this is a big assumption, because I know like zeros. But I would assume the school doesn't have some survey that they give parents that says, are you homeless right now, or are you doubled up? Is it all from like counselors, teachers, people that interact with the students that way?
That's my understanding, is that these are students who come to the attention and then they are connected. Each school has a McKinney-Vento representative, somebody who's the connector. And then they work with the student and their families to try to help them connect them with services. And I imagine that's where these numbers, I don't know, I will find out, but I don't know the chain of how this data is reported or where these numbers.
So how it happens is, so as part of that, you can be identified through the teacher or counselor, et cetera. But there still is a survey that goes out to the families and parents. Typically, that's not going to capture people who, at the start of the school year were housed, but a few months later, parents lost a job, and then that's how this teachers, counselors may get notified later on. So they don't send out this housing survey weekly. It's typically annually or the start of the semester. And this Pinellas County School Board, they actually, through that data, they have a data team and IRB process that I go through every year. And they send me the aggregate number, so not individual, but just the total numbers for each student category of homelessness. And like we talked about before, the share of housing and the cumulative nature over time is going to, compared to our numbers, the PIT numbers and the HIC numbers, it's going to be a really concerning thing to look at, as it is, but we have to be relative about it. Yeah.
And I do want to add the housing inventory count, the HIC, those numbers come from HMIS. And of course, data from DV shelters that are not entered into HMIS are also included in the housing inventory count. So this is exclusively, the housing inventory count is exclusively a count of sheltered homelessness through HMIS and our DV providers. And then there is, of course, the point in time count of unsheltered homelessness. And then the jail and the school data are a separate part of this report, and they're separated out because they don't meet that same definition of homelessness. So they're not reported to HUD alongside the PIT and HIC data. But we want to make sure that our community has a much broader and more accurate picture of homelessness. So that is why that information is included in the point in time report, because it is absolutely critical for system planning. So Though this particular data doesn't include the school or the jail data, this is just that housing inventory count. That other information will absolutely be included later on in this presentation and report as well.
This is the subpopulation, so it's part of, and this is actually a great segue into this slide. So when people are looking at just shelters, they're entered into the homeless management information system, HMIS. And so along their, I guess, HMIS journey, so when someone goes to a provider who enters into HMIS, they're asked a series of questions, and some of those questions pertain to disabilities. These could be adults, do you have a serious mental illness? Do you have a drug or alcohol use disorder, combined into substance use disorder? Do you have HIV/AIDS, or are you a survivor of domestic violence? So those are questions that are asked upon the HMIS entry or throughout. Someone may not actually disclose that I have an alcohol use disorder because maybe I want to get into the shelter. And if I disclose that, they won't let me in. But maybe later on they'll disclose it. So these numbers, I say all of that because these numbers are likely an underestimate, but nonetheless the absolute best you can do. So the quality is very strong on that. But still, just because of the nature of the stigma behind some of these questions, especially HIV/AIDS. Not everybody freely discloses that, especially if you want to, if you think that might prevent you. Excuse me. So green, emergency shelter; blue, transitional housing; red, safe haven. There is most people who say they have a serious mental illness are within emergency shelters, and that's going to be across the board for everything, just because there's more people. But overall, almost 170, slightly over 160 people have report a serious mental illness. Almost 150 report a substance use disorder. And then when we get into HIV/AIDS, close to 20. And that most particularly may be an underreport.
I was just gonna suggest, would it be possible to do that by percent? That would be a more meaningful way to look at that data.
When we look at the standard, there should be a table.
Because, you wanna know what percentage of people in an emergency shelter have these conditions, what percentage of people versus numbers, because otherwise it's not really helpful.
Yeah, that's a great point. And so I thought of that. So that's
Like next year,
it should be in the appendix in the overall thing, or next to the figure that was so many pages. So in that section, the housing inventory, if that's not there, that's something that I can just copy over because I do have that.
I think all the stats pretty much all the stats have the percentage in the actual report, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I see it. Yeah, it's in there somewhere.
It's just, I think it's about 150 pages, so it may take you some time to scroll to the appendix, which is, all of these figures have corresponding tables with the numbers and percentages. It's just really far down, so it's difficult to get to. And I do include percentages in the PIT, the sheltered and unsheltered comparison, so you can actually make that direct comparison because the numbers are vastly different. But yeah, excellent point. And now we're looking at the trends. So the yellow line is total count, including all of the different shelter types: green, emergency; blue, transitional; red, safe haven. So there's been a relatively, and you'll see, I say relatively once I show you the PIT downward trend, but relatively stable count, although decreasing. Over time, the unsheltered count has just drastically decreased. Shelter count, especially when looking at safe havens and transitional, is relatively stable. There is some fluctuation in the emergency shelter beds of the green line, and that's where you can see really steers the total count. But overall, there's been a stable but still downward trend in the total number of people counted through HMI that are experiencing shelter. Any questions about shelter? Because I'll switch now to the unsheltered count. So the point in time count and survey. These graphs over here represent the hotspots of where people were actually physically counted. This one, however, represents, where people report their frequent area of stay. So one of the questions, and those of you have the report open, Appendix A actually has the survey, so you can see exactly what questions are asked. And one of those questions is essentially, what area do you frequent most, or where do you frequently stay? So most people report St. Pete in the Clearwater area as their frequent area of stay. That's not where they were counted. That's where the other two graphs, but that's where they report they stay. And actually, about 20, you'll notice that there's 538 people who are identified as unsheltered, but only 503. That's because some people actually reported Hillsborough County, or did not disclose where they frequently stay for reasons we can discuss at the end. Similar to the past 3 years I've been doing this, pretty much the exact same trend of where people are counted along that corridor. And within these zip codes, we can see the city centers, larger metropolitanized areas. So it's downtown St. Pete, more particularly, and I believe there's going to be a live interactive map that's uploaded if it hasn't been already. You can actually notice that it's going to be in some of these bus stop areas, and then fallen pit deployment sites. As I say every year, I pose the question to you, I always contemplate, are there any people who are experiencing homelessness in these areas, or is that just where, is there something about those areas where people, volunteers don't go, to count? Maybe it's safety, maybe it's, pushback from local government officials or city officials, maybe it's just the sheer volume of the size of the county relative to the number of volunteers, so. This just shows where people are counted. It may not be truly reflective of actual all of unsheltered homelessness. Same format as the shelter count. We can see, breaking it down by household. This is all households, so everyone who is counted as unsheltered during the point in time counting survey. Most people identify as male, white, and over the age of 45. So that could be 45 to 54, 55 to 61, or 62 plus. But similarly, when we're looking at a breakdown by household type, that's where these disparities emerge, but actually largely to a lesser extent, and there's explanations for that, which we'll get into. But households without children, as with the shelter, most of them have. These are single male adults, but households with one adult child, and so family households, at least one adult and one child. That's where we see it's back to that same pattern that you're going to see. It's going to be mostly women and mostly people who identify as Black or African American. So looking at race, we see the same thing. This dark blue, looking at family households, so 46% of people who were in a family household that were unsheltered, identified as a Black or African American. And looking at other subpopulations too, the basically single, so households, wherever it says households without children, that's going to be single adults. That's going to be male, and that's going to be white. As you can see, even with veterans as well. Okay, now looking at the unsheltered age. Once again, similar pattern, which I think all of you guys know and have identified over years and on a daily basis, is it's an older population or aging population that's experiencing homelessness. When looking at households without children, once again, single adults. But when looking at family households, we can see that a larger proportion of people who are younger than 18, even you who are younger than 5 to 12, or 13 to 17, and these are the children of the people experiencing unsheltered homelessness and families. Now looking at chronic homelessness, chronic's going to be in green. This is I think a point of conversation that I hope we can have Chronic homelessness is, mostly observed in the unsheltered count. You can see that almost 50% of people who are unsheltered, so about 257 people. So technically 48%, but about half of the people who are unsheltered are experiencing chronic homelessness. And that pattern holds true for households without children, which we can expect because that's most of the unsheltered, right? The silver lining, once again, for this is that families experiencing unsheltered homelessness or households with at least one adult, one child, significantly smaller proportion of chronic families experiencing chronic homelessness. And maybe more than we want, of course. We're trying to say, somewhat at the positive side compared to the single adult households, who are generally people who are more hesitant to accept or receive services and as opposed to families. So there is very good targeted outreach happening across the board because, and this is actually something I wanted to bring up about the shelter count and the disparities. Some of these disparities reflect a very targeted approach where people are clearly going out and identifying families in need, and that's why they're sheltered. It could be various populations. So the street outreach or just provider outreach, law enforcement outreach is actually doing a great job. So it could be interpreted in a negative way, saying, why are there so many women and people who identify as Black or African American? That's certainly true, but it also could be interpreted as, wow, there's really good job of targeted outreach at making sure we get those vulnerable populations, women, children, etc. Same with the shelter count. This is the subpopulation. So this is actually, these are questions that are asked during the point of time count and survey. Same as the questions asked during intake or throughout someone's HMIS journey. So when they interact with providers, we can see, and this is pretty similar to years past, relative, looking at the raw numbers, about 180 people reported that they have a serious mental illness. 180 people who are unsheltered reported that they have a serious mental illness. And a similar number of people with a substance use disorder. And also, a relatively high, especially in comparison to the rest of the numbers in the overall count, have experienced domestic violence or survived domestic violence. And that could be, and some report, which I'll show you, a reason for unsheltered homelessness. Adults with, who report HIV or AIDS, relative to the overall count, small number. However, this is still likely underreported, and these are people who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness and may have actually more difficult time seeking primary care or care to treat their chronic disabilities or their other chronic conditions, and also more costly to local government.
I have a question, I think it was more for the last slide, but when we're looking at the unsheltered, so people aged 25 to 64 make up 81% of the unsheltered population. 279 ages 25 to 54 and 154 or 29% ages 55 to 64. So we normally consider, right, the ages 25 to 64 as prime working ages. So do we tease out any data that though these people are unsheltered, these age groups 25 to 64, we can't assume they're all not working. Some might be working and can't afford housing, correct?
If you get it, right, so in the appendix A, if you have the actual 150-page report, you can see all the questions. So they ask about some demographic characteristics, believe employment, but
I don't remember asking.
Yeah,
like,
'cause
are you employed
it's
or what's the last
excuse me,
you worked
it's
or?
education.
Yeah,
So they ask about education status, and that's in there as well. So that's a great point to actually be vigilant to look at. Is one of my recommendations, not just for unsheltered, but sheltered and everything, is actually to embed workforce specialists, potentially partner with the new workforce center that opened up at the University of South Florida to actually work with vocational rehabilitation and vocational training. So,
and I don't know if Lieutenant H like anecdotally off the top of your head, do you have like an idea of what percentage of the people who stay at Safe Harbor go out for a job every day?
I've studied it, I've looked at it in the past, it's usually like 30, mid-30s% that are working regularly.
See, that's significant.
Uh,
That's really,
That's about the same as our shelter too.
that's a significant data point, and I think that needs to be communicated in these PIT reports, is that these are working poor who can't afford housing. It's not, these aren't all people who choose not to work and they're in their prime working ages.
This next slide
Yeah.
shows by far the.
It's hard to read in the back, but yeah, I'll read this out loud, so.
Well, yeah, and it's kind of like a dog question, when you ask that, it's like, well, why are you homeless? Can't afford it, but yeah.
That's one way to look at it. By far, the most reported reason for, homelessness is financial problems, or lost job. And interesting, for better or worse, right? You can see this lighter color, which may be hard to see back there, is last year, 2024. The darker color, is 2025 of this year. So although there was 538 people counted this year compared to 721 last year, we actually still see more people, right? And this is where the percentages come in, so you can actually standardize it. But relative to that, you actually see, despite the fewer count, more people are reporting their primary reason for losing their home or becoming homeless is they lost their job or financial problems. And this is also followed by family issues, and then medical conditions, disability, alcohol or drug disorder, eviction, much higher than last year.
And natural disasters
Natural
as well.
Exactly, right. Yeah. So natural disaster, I think we all know that Pinellas County did not have the best year, and a lot of people lost their homes and a lot of other things as well. And that's reflected in this point in time count report.
And then eviction, do you know what the percentage is between 24 and 25? Because it looks like it's quite substantial.
If you look at the appendix, there's a
Okay, it's in
change.
there.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I don't have it, but
Almost looks double.
It does, I mean, which is pretty significant.
yeah. And this is, so one of the reasons.
Cost of housing.
One of the reasons that I want to get into here is, probably this is due to the, loss of the COVID-19 protections, some of the housing things, and we can see that, people were probably more likely to be evicted or not be able to cover rent, or if they're late on rent, more importantly, in many cases. But when we look at, this is the trend over.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, I pulled the eviction percentage. Yeah, of course. So for yes, it is 25%. For no, it is 66%. Not reported was 9% for this year. That wasn't the comparison, but that was the for this year percentages. If that is helpful.
This is the trend over time for unsheltered. So last year, I mean, I think I know I was kind of concerned because this drop, and the increase, I highlighted in red, that's the 2024 count. That was the concerning thing, and Lieutenant Hayes actually brought to the attention, because with the big drop we had this year, I was really nervous. Is this a problem with the data? Is this a problem with counting error? How could this happen? Well, if you put it in perspective, this is the anomaly. The spike last year. Overall, there's been a steady downward trend of unsheltered homelessness, which holds true throughout the state of Florida and other counties that I've looked at throughout the west and northeast part of the United States. So there's a lot of reasons why there could be this drop.
Ms. Teresa Jones has a question online.
Go ahead, Teresa.
Actually, it's not a question. I actually was going to say that I would hope that some of that drop is related
Looks
to.
like you're talking, but we can't hear you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Because my mic's not muted.
She's unmuted.
She is.
This sounds like it's more of a problem with the.
We
mic.
can hear you
Can
on
you
mine
type
though,
in your
Teresa.
question?
Okay, we can hear you again.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I would hope that the drop is related to some of the interventions. I'm looking back at this graph, and it shows like from 2017 that there has been some dropping, and I know that's when the rapid rehousing program was started. But I also am thinking that possibly that drop is because some folks may be hiding better and we're not being able to identify them in light of the fact that the new anti-camping law came into place. Thank you.
I think that's a good point, and also, the report states that we had far fewer volunteers out, like 100 fewer-ish. I think it was close to that many, fewer volunteers out doing the pit count. Yeah.
I just had a thought back to Kathleen's comment on the work issue. I just don't wanna lose, I don't know if we'll get it to later, just maybe, and maybe it's for the point in time committee. But if this is an area where we were interested in, it might be a considerating question, because I don't believe we asked that question.
Yeah.
From my recollection, are you currently employed?
Yeah.
So we're interested in that piece, then we could really look at, okay, how much of our homeless population is working?
Is Alice at, right? Yeah, Walton.
And
But, going back to the same question. The data in that question is important and trying to get to the root of this, but when I've done the point in time count in the past and when we had a quick meeting after and afterward. I don't know if you're gonna get an honest response from somebody that you just met on the side of the road. I'm not gonna tell you that I drank an 18 pack every day and that's why I really became homeless. I'm gonna say, oh, financial items. I lost my job. So I just think it's important to keep that in consideration when if we want to heavily rely on this data.
And I was thinking too, the eviction question, and some people may choose eviction as a choice and not financial, and they got evicted because the rent went up and they can't afford it, and so it really is both, right? So, yeah, I mean, is it eviction related to behavior or something other than financial, but. Oh, go ahead.
I have a question. I'm either going to open a Pandora's box and make myself look like an idiot. Have we come up with some kind of strategy on when volunteers are gathering this information? Because some of the homeless are not going to want to answer the questions correctly for fear of that information being shared with inappropriately to agencies or, in that manner, and that could corrupt the data. Have we come up with anything with that yet?
I'm gonna maybe deflect that to Victoria, but before we talk about this, so there are, I mean, I looked at almost every possible solution or explanation that to explain this drop. There's the positive, which exactly what Teresa said, is like in other years when other interventions have happened, there has also been a corresponding drop. There is clearly working, something is working, and that's why. Saying what specifically is working requires, I think it's maybe recommendation 3 in my report is really building that ongoing evaluation, because at one point in time where everyone across the US is guessing, but there is a clear pattern. There's also a pattern with the number of volunteers, which I put in the executive summary. So if there's more volunteers, more people get counted. And then, of course, there's also hurricanes. So a lot of people, and nobody actually has this data, which is very frustrating or anywhere, is the FEMA. So how many people were housed as a result of FEMA funds as well? And so, and also looking at, speaking with people with lived experience and everything, and that committee, also just people who I personally know. There was fear of police officers. And so what the data does not capture is how many people walked away when they saw law enforcement. But in defense of law enforcement, I did a more in-depth analysis, and the number of people who completed surveys. So a lot of people, I actually looked at several of you, I think Sam and I went over it. I could see exactly how many surveys individuals completed and who completed them. About 50 were dropped from the final report because people did not disclose demographic information, i.e., or more specifically, they did not want to be identified, which we all understand. the part where it's in defense of law enforcement is if a law enforcement officer started a survey, he or she completed it at the same rate as every other type of volunteer. So, other volunteers include nonprofit, street outreach, government employees. So actually, if they started it, but what it doesn't capture is how many people saw the law enforcement officer and ran away, which, you know, I probably would do.
And
Uh,
to
and
add
into
to
the-
that,
the-
yeah.
the-
To add to that, so as far as approaching volunteers or approaching, folks asking questions, that is definitely part of the training process. This is entirely voluntary, so volunteers are, one of my big parts of training is about the importance of consent, and the fact that folks do not have to answer any questions, and they also may opt out of individual questions. And so that is something that volunteers absolutely have to face and have to deal with throughout the day. One of the things I know that we had talked about the lived experience committee getting more involved this year is helping educate the unsheltered community before the before next year's point in time count to try and dispel some of that fear. I know that that was one of the things that you know, y'all and Kat had really, that's the secretary of the lived experience committee, had talked about wanting to participate in this year. And I think that that is going to be a really helpful thing, because we can train volunteers until we are all blue in the face. But until folks know that their data is protected, and not just in pit surveys, in SPDATs and things like that as well. Until folks know that they can trust the person with the clipboard, that is always going to be a factor. Absolutely.
I found that, a lot of times, certain questions will trigger the walk away, like, well, where do you stay now? Right there.
Yeah.
Dead giveaway trigger. So, all right, that's it.
Yeah.
Now walk away.
Yeah, and that's definitely one of the questions that we saw answered a little less frequently this year.
Does Sherry have her?
Yes, Sherry. you have a question.
I do. Just a quick question. I'm trying to remember this off the top of my head, but Freeman, do you remember if, and I know it's in there somewhere, was the difference in volunteers? Was that
Yeah,
this year or was last year? Was there a spike in volunteers? I can't how was that trend over time? I'm just curious. And then the second thing was that Cindy had her hand up a couple times. Just want to make sure that she was able to get her question
So
answered.
to answer that briefly, in the executive summary, there's a really clear image, a graphical image, but there was about 100 fewer volunteers this year. And also, you know, a little bit more than 100 fewer surveys counted this year. So you can see it was kind of almost made a triangle. And you can see in the executive summary, if that makes sense, but yeah. About 100 fewer to answer the question compared to last year.
Cindy?
Thank you. I just wanted to remark on the chart that's actually up right now. I wanted to make everyone aware that HLA became the lead agency for HMIS in October of 2017. And so the methodology may have changed from when 211 had it in 2016, but I also wanted to remark about how it went down with COVID and now it kind of leveled out. And I've been looking for where these individuals have gone, but now we can see it's still going down. So it doesn't support, the COVID counts were not showing very high numbers. We did do like an average for 2021, but it wasn't used as part of an upload to HUD. But I just wanted to remark that the high end there, I'm not sure if they use the same methodology as we did in 2018 or not. So that's why you see that large dip. And then COVID, of course. That's all I wanted to remark on.
I'm gonna, well, how do we do?
Yeah.
That's okay, if it's a little over, I could speak through things more. I know there's an agenda that has to be done after.
Yeah, we can go a little bit over, but I think, you know, there's probably gonna be some robust discussion, of your recommendations too.
Well, maybe should we just jump into that, because this is the comparison, I'll just do, let's do the 4 minutes or less. For the rest of this, comparison, this is standardized, so in this one, there is clearly more people who are sheltered, who experience homelessness at the top left, as opposed to unsheltered. 29% of the total people experiencing homelessness according to HUD guidelines were unsheltered. When we look at the racial distribution, same pattern holds. It's really gonna be, we're looking at all households, it's gonna be male, and that holds true between sheltered and unsheltered. And it's going to be, when we at all households, it's gonna be people identified as white. When we get to, households without children, it's gonna also look a lot like, all households, but when we get to households with at least one adult and one child, the family household, we can see that there is that disparity between families, gender, and race when looking at those household types, which we talked about already throughout. The jail information. So on the night or day of the count, there was almost 3,000 people who were in the jail. Of those, 125 did not disclose a permanent address, or, there's other characteristics as well that, they were going to state prison if they disclosed, or if they're in there longer than 90 days, etc. But we can see that 125 people, about 4% of the jail population on that day, did not disclose a permanent address. Most of those are male, and as opposed to the PIC and PIT counts, shelter, unsheltered, most are 35 to 44, which lines up with demographic characteristics of people who are arrested is typically around that age range. We start to see the aging population for people sentenced to prison, which is different than jail. And most people identify as white. And these are the characteristics that racial demographics are provided by the jail. When we look at the geographic distribution, this is where people are arrested. So not necessarily where they reside or frequent area stay or anything, but this is of those people who did not disclose a permanent address. This is where they were arrested and brought them to jail. So one of the recommendations, probably a very difficult one, would be to actually work with the jail, the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office, local municipalities to figure out a way to track homelessness related offenses leading to incarceration or arrest, especially in light of the anti-camping legislation. Maybe create some kind of code that may be on the front end where arresting officers, but I put it in there.
There are lots of good ideas in there.
We discussed this at the Public Safety Coordinating Council a little bit extensively. Kind of looking at the jail indicators report, looking at that. We saw more stuff on nice stuff. Yeah, there's not really any clear indicators because the way the anti-camping law is written, it's not associated to a specific violation of state statute. Right. So encoding those, they're being the individuals that are being arrested on existing ordinances and misdemeanor violations that are possible. So trying to track people that are arrested in relation to House Bill 1365 becomes basically impossible. And we really tried to dig deep into this too, because when you look at the jail indicator report, it really breaks down, and we've been working from that end on trying to, get the jail count down. And really the jail count is steady. And I think I texted Amy in April about this when we were having this discussion, because where you saw the difference really, so there's a lot of pressure on you guys on federal stuff. That's really what, because otherwise it's actually the jail count's gone down. It has. Yeah. If you take away federal holds, whatever hold you want to look at, the jail count's actually down. So it's
And what time frame?
we were comparing it year on year, and then we also broke it down for each of the first 6 months of the year.
This year.
Of this year, because I was curious about that as well. And I know that this is not your discussion, but bringing it up, the jail count year on year, month to month is down, except for the increase in federal holds. It's pretty much everywhere.
Is that total population or people who did not disclose an address?
No, that's everybody.
Everyone.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, that's good information, actually, that, that might be something to consider in future reports or hopefully future
And then-
Yeah,
evaluations.
because when you get,
Yeah.
you know, because since Kathleen berated us to make sure we were ready for the meeting. I saw, you know, when we get to the recommendations, that was something I was gonna bring up is, you know, there are ways that we could coordinate between, you know, with the Public Safety Coordinating Council, we do the monthly and we meet quarterly, but we have those monthly indicator reports. Sheriff's Office is already reflecting that. I mean, when we did that sequential intercepting mapping a couple of years ago, we basically came up with the plan on how to engage prior to and eliminate and do discharge planning ahead of, you know, at the onset of incarceration for this population. It's kind of mapped out. It's just trying to find a funding source for it. Right.
I'm glad you brought that up, so sequential intercept mapping, I left out, that's actually what I got my PhD in strategic planning, but that would be, they offer those for homelessness, to map the homeless system of care. So that's something that's kind of anecdotally discussed in the recommendations, but that's really overall, a map is needed to paint that picture. HMIS has a really good flow through chart, but let me do I think I passed the 4-minute speech. So we can see the jail trends have gone down. Compared to last year, they've also gone down. You can see this big spike. That was the change in methodology. So I think future reports we might want to consider starting from last year. So you can start saying, because this really it skews an understanding, because this is a change in methodology, but we can see that there has been a decrease with the same methodology as opposed to last year, which is great news.
You have a question?
I have a question.
Oh, sorry.
And then you price this with this. So when the jail is making their count, is that just the like address, non-address given out?
Are you for the homeless related account?
Yeah,
Yeah, so what we do is we take everybody that was in jail that night.
Yeah.
And then we subtract the people that were in there longer than 90 days. And then we subtract the people that were transferred to a different prison or a different institution. And then we subtract, and then we remove the people, yeah, it's that category there, and then we remove the people that disclosed an address upon release. So those individuals probably didn't want to give their address when they got booked in. And then, so after all, eliminating all those factors, that's when we're left with 125 people that likely walked out the door, that were in custody on that day, that were probably returning to homelessness or going into homelessness.
I just wanted to, because, 20 years I've been handling, very handling advisory, get guys that either the address is Daystar.
Yeah.
Or it's Pinellas Hope or something like that, and.
So those addresses.
That's not, that getting captured by somebody like picking it up.
Yeah, you're looking at it. Yeah, I'm the data point on all this.
Yeah.
So when I do that count, I make sure that addresses that are St. Denis, Turning Point, Safe Harbor, all those are included in that 125.
So the school, we shouldn't breeze through this, but we can see relative to the overall population, keeping in mind all of the discussion we had of homelessness and everything, about 4% of the students within the Pinellas County School Board were identified as homeless. The vast majority, which we got ahead of ourselves a little bit in the right direction, I will say, is shared housing, which is blue. So people who were considered unsheltered, so these are the categories provided, outlined by the Pinellas County School Board. So unsheltered, emergency or transitional, hotel, motel, so, that's not captured, into HUD stuff, or, shared housing, right? Very few people relative to the total population, were experiencing or reported unsheltered homelessness. Once again, during a 4-month time period. So not just one point in time. So if this was if we did a point in time count for school on one particular night, I would wager that number would be significantly smaller. Still very problematic, but we have to keep in mind the methodology of the school. So relative to all of the population, about 4% of students, and of those, most of those are shared housing.
And if you report you're on shelter, you risk losing your children.
This one, yeah. So the demographics, the characteristics still hold, really quickly. The only difference being it's a very even, almost exactly similar male, female difference and so, or boy or girl difference, for student homelessness. We can see that when looking at the racial distribution, we still see, unfortunately, that 41% are, you know, most of the people identify as Black or African American. And they, just like the overall population of Pinellas County, people who are identified as Black or African American make up, I believe it's about 11% of the total population, but in this case, and student homelessness and other types of homelessness identified for HUD, make up the majority of people who are counted. And most of the students here, between the ages 6 and 12. This is just showing the different demographic breakdowns by the shelter type. Most people are shared housing, and it holds steady kind of throughout. And then the change over time, it's been relatively stable. Could be interpreted as good or bad, because I know the schools do have a lot of resource officers and resources there. But what seems to be the interesting thing, in my opinion, is when looking at the housing trends of students younger than 18, more stable. The housing trends of people who are 18 or older dropped, and that's looking at the shared housing. So that's something that we don't dig in. I don't dig into in this report, but I think should be later on. Okay.
Just a quick question on your comment, is this survey anonymous? The school survey, you said.
Well, yes, so when you, I'm assuming like when kids register in July, August, get the big packet of filling out everything. Is there a question in there that says, and so then that would not be anonymous? That's part of a registration packet, where you currently living, are you? So, yeah.
And do you have to put your name, you have to put identifying information on the survey?
Your address.
As a parent, I know throughout the school year, I've had to answer different questions. Now, both my kids attend Title I schools, so I'm always filling out Title I surveys. That often will ask those more specific questions. I'm not aware of how this data is collected, at what point, by what means. I'm happy to get all of those answers and bring them back to the board. I do want to highlight that on page 140, if you go almost to the very last page, is I found to be a good data summary chart. You all want to look at that. And at the bottom of that chart, page 140, it has all images. And it shares the total homelessness from years 2016 to 2025. And it's, I mean, interesting to see, fortunately, how relatively stable that number, that 3,000, 3,500 number has been. But then you have to look at the percent. So and I just wanted to share, if you want to look at that number, because when we first saw that first slide, and you see that 3,600 number, then to look at it over time, and then further to understand how are we gathering this data, who is it coming from? Yeah. And I do know for a fact that every student is connected with the Kingpin to their school, and then connected services, so we follow up with our heat team. So definitely try to make sure they're connected with the right schools.
All right, do you guys want to talk about the recommendations? I think for time, maybe we just, I think you all have glanced over them. Do you guys just want to talk openly about some of the recommendations and what's feasible, or would you like me to go through the slides? Either works. I know we're just on a time constraint.
I think a general conversation would be good, especially because I had asked people to take a look at these. I want to just mention myself, Anne Marie Winter, Teresa Jones, Sandra Newsom, and Lieutenant Hayes were part of the Pitt Count report work group. So we, I don't know, it was like maybe an hour and a half or 2 hours, gave feedback on what we'd like to see in the Pitt report. And one of them was under the recommendations, because in prior reports, it was just like a half page of 6 or 8 recommendations. And so we had advised or requested some short-term goals, like what could we work on for in a year, and what would be some longer term goals. So I very much appreciate you doing this. The first thing that hit me, there were a couple things that I would just throw out there is, these are wonderful recommendations. And in a perfect world, we could do a great job with all of them. My thing was, where's the capacity and where's the funding? And then the other question I had was, well, so I think we need to talk about capacity and funding. I wish we had more elected people here. We've got to go out and get our providers to fund these things. And they are working. We are seeing, if we're looking at a decrease, things are working and we need to continue that. So funding, capacity, prioritize. And then the last thing I would say to you is, do you have a corresponding CoC or agency that's doing this thing well right now that we can model, rather than reinvent the wheel and start from ground zero? Who is doing X, Y, or Z well that we can reach out to learn from? And so that would be my initial feedback about the recommendations. And then, as I look at our whole board, who's willing to step up and take one of those bullets and say, I can lead this, or I'm already doing this, I'll build on this. So that's a really important conversation that absolutely needs to be more than 10 minutes. And so I would propose we have a special CoC Board of Directors meeting to talk about the recommendations, like over 2 hours.
Yeah.
They deserve at least that.
I think that's a great idea. And what I want to disclose, before this, because, I think actually most people are doing many of these recommendations already. I wanted to make sure to put those into, because for the simple reason of why reinvent the wheel, it's working. So I put those, many people are providing trauma-informed care. Many people are advocating for legals. Many people are doing X, Y, and Z. So many of these recommendations are things already being done. So I want to, and this may be a point of clarity, especially, for example, in reference to data analysis and evaluation. HMIS has a very robust infrastructure, and the HMIS team at HLA, who are, the level of detail that they go into, and then I get the opportunity to go into with them is amazing. And so there's already a lot of work in the data analytics side. So you may see recommendations about, do audits and things like that. HMIS does that. There's also, capacity issues. So that's just an example, right? But I think many of the providers in this room and online are going to look at these or have looked at these and may either be frustrated because you're already, you guys are already doing it. Or, what I hope to do in this report was to actually give recognition to say that many of you guys are doing it. And so exactly what you said is to build upon it. So maybe we have a conversation about that, but it does deserve its own meeting.
It deserves a robust, like almost a full day workshop or something.
I actually just brought that up yesterday, yeah.
Does Teresa have her hand? I'm just,
Yes, Teresa does have her hand up.
Teresa?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to concur with your recommendation that we possibly schedule a separate board meeting or to specifically deal with these recommendations. I also concur with what I believe I heard Freeman mention, is that some of these recommendations are already in place and happening. I won't go into specifics, but I do think it's worthy of a broader discussion than the remainder time of this meeting. Thank you.
Ashley?
Can we survey Providers Council to figure out how many of these are already being implemented, and so that we can kind of prioritize the recommendations and then have that work group to discuss?
I think that's great. Kevin, good?
Yeah.
Michael?
So I want to say a couple of things. First of all, I wrote, and a lot of the notes that I wrote here are similar to what you started with, Kathleen, and I don't know if we want to get into a bigger discussion here because, if we were to schedule another meeting, I think we can almost have a discussion about almost each one of these recommendations separately.
Yes.
And the thing is that, every one of them comes back to how are we going to fund it?
Yeah.
And even in the comment you just made, we need to get our providers to fund these things. We need to get people who have money to fund the
Yes.
providers to provide these things.
Yes.
I think that's a clearer way of saying it, because I think from a provider standpoint, we go after funding however we can to provide services. You know, and one of the good things that we have done is by having those joint meetings of the Funders Council and Providers Council, at least we're coordinating better. You know, and making sure that from a provider standpoint that the funders understand. When you, just the one example that jumps to mind is when you have different interpretations of CDBG and we have to, you know, if we get more consistent policy, it'll be easier for us. But in looking at some of these things like enhance HMIS data quality, and it said something along the line of increased funding to expand HMIS staff capacity. Let's increase HMIS funding to allow agency capacity so that we can do a better job of entering into HMIS. I mean, I look at Ashley's program and how large it is. Even our program, we've got more than 100 people in housing, and you know, it's a lot of work. And you know, so all right, then if we fund more positions at the HLA, then are they going to come do this for us? Because there's always this expectation that we have to figure out how to do it. I guess my point would be, you know, is when you look at each one of these, they can be pretty separate discussions.
Yes.
Because the last one that I wanted to bring up is, you know, when you talk about on a recommendation to encourage affordable housing development through local incentives, fee waivers, expedited permitting, flexible zoning and density bonuses. I agree with all that. And there's not literally one person who's on this board or in this room who will talk about, you know, expedited permitting. And
Well,
even if,
elected officials.
okay, but elected officials aren't staff. And when
Right,
you try to
right.
do a project like this, I love Deborah. She is one of the best people I've worked with in government, period. And I'm glad to say that publicly. You know what? She can only go so far as an elected official. When you were an elected official, you met with Mariana and I.
Yeah.
By the time it gets to staff, that's a whole different discussion and a whole different set of things. And yeah, eventually it'll come for a vote. But, you know, we need affordable housing now, not 2 years from now, when staff is done kind of tearing it apart and telling us why we can't do things. I had a discussion literally yesterday with some planning people at the county, because we want to put a contract in on a piece of land where we could do a pretty substantive affordable housing project. And, you know, and the first discussion is, well, you've got to meet with these people because the neighborhood's going to push back. And then by the time it could still get approved, you know, by the county commission because of the nature of the project. But, you know, this particular neighborhood association always fights everything like this because you want to do multifamily and they want single family, and staff, you know, it slows the whole process down. So that sounds great.
I know, yeah.
But like, no one who can really do something with that is part of these meetings.
But I think we have to start somewhere.
We do.
We have to start somewhere. I really appreciate the recommendations and the targeted way you put short-term and long-term goals. I think that is something that we wanted from last year's report. So that's great that we have that. So I think we're building on it. And so I think Ashley's point about what is being done, let's recognize that and then have a meeting to decide, okay, well, which of these recommendations are we really going to focus on? Get data to support what is needed and then make the pitch as a board to whether it's the county or the municipalities or other funders, because that's what they're looking for. They're going to want substantive information on what the ask is and what the justification is. And I think we have the data now that shows what we need to do with recommendations, and it's just putting that together. So I do think that another meeting is needed. But I agree with you, Michael, that, you know, we do need influential, those that can influence policy and funding to be here. But I think we are on the right track to start doing that.
I hope we do this because, you know, I one of the things I wanted to do and didn't have time to do is go back to last year's recommendations, because we had the data last year, we had the data the year before, we had the data the year before that. Every year we have sets of recommendations. Do we act on the recommendations other than we have them?
Right.
You know, because if we don't act on them,
Right.
then we're just gonna have the same discussion every year.
Well, I would propose, since it's 10:40, and I feel that the report is the report, I hope that I appreciate all the work that Victoria and the Pitt group did. I appreciate Dr. Gephardt and his report that he's done. I hope that we can approve the report, the official report today and vote on that. And I would propose that we can either hold a special board of directors meeting just to talk about the recommendations and get some overall, people can vent and have their feedback and have a 2-hour meeting that way. But I think it really deserves a work group that will continue to look at these recommendations and, let's assume we have a 2-hour full board meeting, anybody can attend and give their feedback on these recommendations, prioritization. Take into account the providers who have already given us some focused information. But I think it needs a work group to continue forward throughout the year, really.
So, I would
So
almost.
can I interject for a
Yeah.
second, please, because I did have my hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So we're going somewhere else, and we'll be talking about this for a minute, so thank you so much for that, Jalazo. I think where we've gotten to is that we need another work group. I think we've already landed on that. I think we've landed on the fact that we have the recommendations that we appreciate, and thank you so much for your presentation on that. We've landed on that. Also, as far as the funding is concerned, and thank you, Mike, again, for making that point that you can have electeds here. I just had some things passed in council yesterday that I started back in 21. So there's nothing that moves rapidly, when it comes down to things like this. So to Kathleen's point, we have an advocacy committee here now that's already active. My question would be for the board, and I did hear what she said in regards to starting a different work group. I don't want to keep starting a whole bunch of different work groups for me, because I don't want to overtax anybody. Would it be beneficial for us to take the Providers Council, the Funders Council, and the Advocacy Committee to review what we've already done to go over the recommendations? Because I agree with you. We do need to have a separate meeting, because I'm also looking at the time, as you stated, this 10:46 now. Because we'll be talking about this for like another 30-45 minutes. Is there some way we can go ahead and schedule a meeting now, combine those committees, and to dissect what we have as far as the recommendations are concerned? Because you're right, we can have every elected official, including mayors, they still have to go through somebody to get it done. So everybody has a role in this, and I'm just hoping that before we leave today, that we can have that conversation as to what the next steps look like before we leave, because I don't want to take your agenda, Kathleen, but I know we do have quite a bit to do. So I just kind of wanted to put that out on, because I kept raising my hand trying to.
I appreciate that, and I'm sorry I didn't see you shoulder to shoulder. I appreciate the funders, providers, and advocacy could do that, but like any committee and work group that we have out there, it's open to anyone.
We know, open to everybody, but we gotta get somebody to try this.
And then as far as scheduling or setting a date today, we need to do doodle polls and that kind of thing, but I think that's a valid suggestion.
So
Michael,
two, and I will be.
and then I saw you, Megan, yeah.
Two quick things. One, I think that, and I'll be glad to make a motion to accept the reports, because we want to get that done
Yeah,
today. I think you're right about that. But I almost want, at least for us to think, we have another meeting, really, and I'm not saying we need to have 7 subgroups.
Right.
That's where I was trying to go with this, is that you have 7 recommendations that are not all the same, and some of them are very distinct. And I would rather have 7 subgroups, one that brings all the officials from Clearwater, St. Petersburg, Pinellas County for unincorporated, to get staff here when we're gonna talk about permitting. And if we're gonna talk about evaluation, that we get the right people here, because us meeting as a board on a 5,000-foot level with these things.
Yeah.
Isn't gonna really get us where we wanna go.
Right.
That's all I was gonna
Right.
say, but I
And
will
we
be
do
glad to
need-
make the motion on session report.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to accept our 2025 point in time report. All those in favor? Online, could you please vote with a button? Megan, let us know how that's going.
And Sandra's hand.
And yes, Sandra, does have a question.
Okay. Sandra has a question?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Sandra.
Hi, thank you. Actually, I'll hold back my question. I guess some of these recommendations, and I think having a work group is really important, given some of the changes in the federal level on funding might impact how some of these recommendations move forward. So hopefully we'll have more clarity about that when that committee meets, but just something we need to keep in mind. But I will participate in the discussions at the time.
Thank you. We value that. That's an excellent point. Yeah, thank you, Sandra. Go ahead, yeah.
Based on what she just said with the funding, what is the recommend, because I don't know what the timeline looks like. How soon should we be acting on this as far as getting together to talk about the recommendation?
I think,
October.
Before October?
October.
well, and I think ideally as soon as possible. And when we're presenting to municipalities and governments who are planning their budgets, you know, right after the start of the new budget year, they start to plan for January discussions. We need to be ahead of that, ideally. Okay. Yeah. So, no, we're looking to keep going. Okay, so we have a motion, motion approved, and it's approved, right? Oh, Victoria?
Sorry, I wanted to have, there was, Sherry, do you mind if I ask you to come off mute real quick? And I just wanted to ask Sherry if you, before the report's final approval, wanted to, discuss recommendation, number 3 really quickly, or if you are,
There's some, so maybe
I think-
just really quick, so there's actually, well, one table I need to add in, which is actually the jail count of ages, so there's 3 copy edit issues. Doesn't affect any of the data, any of the results, but I personally want to add in some of the additional tables for clarification, so I do edit in with those 3, adding in a table and then changing a few formatting things. Like in the recommendations, you may notice some spacing issues and things like that. But yeah, I think, is that what you were getting at, Victoria?
yeah, I wanted to make sure that the board was aware of that, just so you don't, no surprises.
Okay. So, Michael, do you want to modify your motion to approve with the minor edits that Dr. Gerhardt
I'll make that friendly amendment. Okay. Approve the report with edits to be made by Dr. Gerhardt.
Thank you. And second?
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Sam. All right.
And they're already done, actually, so it's just a matter of resending two packets,
Okay.
so.
Can y'all repeat that motion? I couldn't hear what he said, what the motion is now.
It's the same motion, Teresa, just with acknowledging that there will be edits to things added to the report by Dr. Gerhardt.
Formatting.
Format.
Thank you.
So we need to revote on that with that amendment.
It would friendly.
Okay, yep. All right, so all those in favor of Michael Gelazzo's motion with the friendly edits, say aye, or and vote online. And then any opposed? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for approving that very important report. There'll be a press release that goes out. And I would hope that, first of all, I appreciate the one pager that's included. And if you have peers or, other elected officials or people that you want to share that with and discuss it, it's a good starting point. And the executive summary at the discussion, I guess it's called a discussion, at the end is easy to understand. It highlights higher level numbers. And I think we need to talk about the successes that we have had, the reduction. We talked briefly about what might have impacted those lower numbers, but we also could think about things are working and we need to continue to fund transitional housing, permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, landlord liaisons, all those things that are working. And we need to be aware that we didn't discuss either, that the growing demographic of elderly entering homelessness is something that needs to be addressed. So, great, thank you. And then we will, the executive committee meets right after this, and we'll kind of formalize some ideas about that, what a work group will look like for a special CoC board meeting to discuss more fully these recommendations, because they deserve full and robust discussions. So thank you. All right, we have worked diligently on